So looking back, when you think about the 2007, 2008 financial crisis, and again, in my mind, it's always 2008 just because it times in with the U.S. election from that year. But it seems, looking back, is more like one thing. And obviously living through it, though, we kind of recognize that there was never like a single moment where the market fell down. Like with the Great Depression, you actually had like the day. But this was more of just like a series of events that ultimately led this way.
Right, basically like a mudslide or like a snowball rolling down a hill.
Right.
It was kind of going for a long time, and it just got worse and worse as it went.
Right, you basically didn't even know where the end was going to happen until we kind of started going back the other way. And so the movie today, The Big Short, I think as you mentioned off the air, does such a great job of illustrating this whole issue that if you've seen this movie, we really don't have a lot to add. And I even found something that said it's insanely accurate and maybe one of the most accurate movies we've talked about on the whole list, up there with something like Downfall. And I forget where I saw it, but it was basically some group saying it's like 90+% accurate. And some of the only changes that are significant is the characters we do see the story through. Most of them are proxies or amalgamations. And I think Christian Bale's character is the only one that's like literally playing the guy with the same name that he had in real life. Versus other guys are mostly based on particular people, but they've changed the name. Other guys are kind of combined characters. But that aside, the Watts are spot on, and everything they explain, how the financial systems work. And for those who haven't seen the movie, well, one, you need to watch it, but two, to give an even simpler version of what caused this whole problem in the first place. And I'm going to try to do it in like 30 seconds versus, anything else out there, a 2-hour movie or even a 10-minute YouTube video. Basically, banks were giving mortgages to people who couldn't afford to pay the mortgages, and enough time of that happening and enough of these mortgages getting sold off to bigger banks so that the banks who gave the loan didn't have to worry about it anymore. That happening for years and on too large a scale basically caused that whole system to collapse when people weren't able to pay their mortgages and housing prices dropped. And the bubble burst is basically what you would say.
Right, because like they say in the movie, it was considered low risk, high reward because, they say multiple times, who doesn't pay their mortgage? Everyone pays their mortgage. Which
everyone who can afford
was
to
true when there were strict standards for getting a mortgage, like income verification and stuff like that. But they were selling these what they call mortgage-backed securities or MBSs, and investors were buying them up like crazy, and investors wanted more of them, so lenders began making more of them by loosening lending standards. They weren't verifying income. They were giving ninja loans, which they mentioned by name in the movie, but no income, no job or assets.
And still getting a loan.
Right. And then adjustable rate mortgages where you could pay it, you could afford it at first, but
the payments got bigger and bigger.
After a couple of years, you couldn't pay your mortgage anymore. So then with MBSs and then CDOs, which are collateralized debt obligations, which are I don't really understand, even after watching this movie and trying
I don't get too into the weeds
learn
here.
what they are. But it's basically another thing that people were investing in. So you have a ton of money tied up in these MBSs and CDOs, and then people started defaulting on their mortgages. So once people start defaulting on their mortgages, they sell their houses. Well, once a ton of people start selling their houses, now supply has gone way up, but no one's buying houses, so demand is going way down, so prices plummet, which means that the value of these MBSs are going down. And then that also means that people who then already owned houses, now they had mortgages that were for way more than their house was actually worth, so then they stopped paying their mortgage. And then it was just like this snowball effect. It was like dominoes.
Right, all while the rating agencies are still saying that these mortgage-backed securities are still top-notch and low risk. but the risk was skyrocketing.
Yes, and those lending practices, the no verification, ninja loans, adjustable rate, all the predatory lending was new, and so credit rating agencies could point to historical data and say, look at how safe these investments are. Everyone's still paying their mortgage, which wasn't the case.
I think of the phrase of a common warning phrase that we sometimes ignore, and it essentially applies to even the stock market today. It's past results are not indicative of future results. And we were basically ignoring that and just kind of trusting that there was nothing safer than the American housing market because it had been stable and just kind of this slow, steady incline for decades. Why would there ever be a drop? And it was just arrogance. So then the movie The Big Short follows 3 or 4 different parallel storylines with these different guys and different groups and investors who were the minority. I mean, vast minority. You're talking like the 0.001% of people who saw it coming and bet against the U.S. housing market, and were basically, again, that gets complicated too, but basically they were putting money down where they would make money if the entire housing market collapsed.
Right. They were buying what were called credit default swaps, which is basically an insurance policy, or it's insurance on defaulting an MBS.
Which basically had never happened.
Right, and these guys were the first ones to do it, but as the crash went on, more people were trying to buy the same thing, and that just exacerbated the problem because then the banks that were offering these credit default swaps didn't have enough money to back them up. So once the MBSs started crashing, people were and we see it in the movie,
They couldn't even give you your payout then, right?
Right. And that's one of my favorite scenes of the movie is when Christian Bale's character is talking to the very first bank that he wants to do this with, and he says, I just want to be, I want to have guarantee that I'll still get paid even if there's solvency issues with your bank. And they're like,
and they think he's an idiot.
You're telling us that you're worried that we're not going to be able to pay you? And he's like, yes.
And he ends up being right.
Right. And then that exact thing happens because it's like the 3 banks, like one tells them, oh, we had a power outage. One tells them their server crashed, so they're like trying to, make these excuses and not have to talk to him because they're trying to rush to then do the exact same thing that he had been doing for years up to that point.
Right. And so yeah, and basically all his other investors and employees and everything kind of start turning against him. And he was right. He was almost so right. He was too early. He saw this coming, and I don't know the exact year, but like 04, 05, he's starting to put money.
2005. So basically 2.5, 3 years before the actual crash was in its peak.
Right. He's putting millions of dollars towards betting on the housing market collapsing.
Yeah.
He was right. He was just so early, he almost went bankrupt because he was too early.
Yeah.
And so it's worth noting, too, that Bale as Michael Burry is like the one that's the actual guy's name. Michael Burry is the guy who did this, and Christian Bale plays him.
And apparently, according to IMDb, the t-shirt and cargo shorts that he's wearing through like the whole movie pretty much is actually belong to the real Michael Burry.
That totally makes sense.
He borrowed them from the guy. Yeah.
I buy that 100%.
I love the performances in this movie. This is kind of like a good place to segue into that.
Yes, it's a great movie.
But I think Christian Bale stands out though among all the great performances.
I would agree. It's a great cast, but Christian Bale still steals the show. Yep.
Yeah. And it's like it's understated. He's not doing anything crazy. Like
he's just an odd guy, yeah.
Yeah. Just and his mannerisms.
He's basically like this hedge fund manager who walks around the office barefoot and stuff. Yeah, just kind of quirky but he's got all the research. He like people are like, you're crazy, but then he pulls up just like spreadsheets of data that he's collected. It's like, no, he's the only one they're like, you're telling me you looked through and saw that all these loans were bad? He's like, they're basically like, how do you have this information? He's like, I looked through them one loan at a time.
Yeah, he said, I read them. And he said, nobody reads them. He says, the only people that read them are the lawyers that put them together. And he comes back with, well, I don't even think they read them.
Right.
He's like, I'm pretty sure I'm the only person that's actually read this information.
Right. So you think of all these bundles of bad loans. He's the only one that's gone through and looked at like, oh, well, this person only made, this amount of money and they shouldn't be able to pay off a loan. And he's just looking at each individual loan that's been clustered into these thousands of loan bundles and sold off as safe. And he's like, I don't basically what is the critical mass? Obviously, there's going to be some level of default that it can sustain, but at some point, it's going to collapse, and he basically bets on it collapsing. And yeah, it was just early. But yeah, the movie itself, just really, really strong film. It was nominated for 5 Oscars, 1 for Best Screenplay. Christian Bale was nominated for Supporting Actor. Adam McKay of Anchorman fame got a Best Director nomination for this film. They got Best Picture nominee. Just a really, really strong film.
Yeah, and this movie is hilarious.
Right. It's essentially a comedy.
Yeah, even watching it, I've seen it a bunch of times, and it's still I still laugh out loud at certain parts, like Ryan Gosling when he's
kind of the narrator of the whole thing. Yeah,
he's given the initial pitch. I think is hilarious. The trip to Miami that they take is just full of funny stuff. I love Rafe Spall's character. He's the guy who's they call him the optimist. The only reason they put up with him is because he's such a good trader, but he's just optimist in the face of everything that's going on. He's always in a good mood and smiling, and it's almost like in comedy movies where you have the straight man that's the one that's sober throughout everyone else being crazy. He's right. It's kind of like the opposite. He's the upbeat and chipper one, and everyone else around him is just miserable.
Yeah.
And then at the end of that Miami trip, when Steve Carell is talking to the stripper, and she tells him about I've got 5 houses and a condo, and it immediately cuts to him running through the airport on the phone. He's like, "There's a bubble."
Right. These people should not be able to afford, summer homes when they're, probably not making enough money. And really strong movie. And actually it's actually a remarkable feat of cinema that they made a movie about the financial crash and crisis and housing market collapse or whatever,
and made it so watchable and entertaining,
and it's funny and it's compelling and it's rewatchable, and it's just it's a remarkable feat.
And the celebrity cameos and the fourth wall break stuff, I think is crucial to that. Margot Robbie, and you've got
Anthony Bourdain,
Anthony Bourdain, R.I.P. Selena Gomez. And that was another just a little instance of comedy when it's Selena Gomez and then the famous economist whose name I can't remember, but it shows his name, and it's
they're having coffee or whatever. Yeah.
It's a whole list of accomplishments. He's a professor. He's got this award in economics, and he's he changed the way that people think about economics and human behavior. And then it's Selena Gomez, pop star.
Yeah, but yeah, it's just a great movie. Don't be afraid to watch this movie because you think you either won't get it or you think it's going to be boring. It's no, it's a comedy. They simplify it in a way. And even if you don't 100% get it, you get what's happening with the drama within the story. And again, there is still plenty of drama while it also is a comedy in a lot of ways. And it's just an engaging film that we highly recommend. It is based on the book by Michael Lewis, who is the same guy who wrote Moneyball, who wrote The Blind Side. So this guy's kind of does a lot of this research to kind of find these stories where there might not otherwise be an obvious story. Moneyball, you think about okay, so you're going to write a book about baseball stats and how that changes the way people build rosters. Doesn't even make sense. So yeah, so he's done some good stuff. As far as the repercussions, so obviously the government had to step in to save a lot of these banks and all the bailouts and stuff, and that's still arguably controversial if they are, say, offering loans that they don't intend for these companies to always pay back, and just the oversight involved is probably not up to where it needs to be. And I've listened to several people on podcasts talk about, despite some of the changes that have been made with the legislation in these industries, we're still at risk of similar things happening again. It's just not well enough protected because the banks still have all the power with lobbying Washington to keep doing whatever they want to do. And if they know they're going to get bailed out again in the future, they're not risking anything. So they can just line their pockets. And if we have an unemployment spike, they don't care.
We are seeing the exact same thing this year with the pandemic, which it's a little bit different because the pandemic it's not like it's the company's fault that they're going under, but I mean, just literally trillions of dollars from the federal government going to bail out these businesses.
Well, and just how nothing about our economy is set up for having rainy day funds. Everything's set up on the norm, and we want to make money and make everything nice and productive when things are normal. But if there's a catastrophe, we just don't bother setting up financially for that eventuality, and it just screws us every time because we have no incentive, or because the government, who should be doing that kind of stuff, basically there's no political will or no financial incentive for them to do it, because they're getting so much money from Wall Street to just keep things good for non-rainy days, and we just kind of end up always kind of in the same spot. And again, as far as economic stuff, we definitely should note we're recording way ahead. It is the beginning of August of 2020, so we do not know at this time what may have happened economically over the last 8 months. So we apologize for that. It could be way better or way worse than it was when we were recording. We're just unaware at this time.
To be fair, though, it's bad right now.
Touche, but could be worse. Take a drink.
Yeah, just a minor thing. I know you're interested in diegesis and diegetic versus non-diegetic sound, and this movie has a good example of shifting diegesis in the scene where Christian Bale is giving the job interview to the kid, and he puts in his headphones, and the music is playing in his headphones, and so that's diegetic sound, and then it goes into the montage of him working, and it's still playing the same music, so it shifts from diegetic to non-diegetic.
Your pluraling of that was very impressive, but I feel like it would be like theodicies or something like that. I don't know. Yeah, so I don't really have much else. There's not... The movie covers so much of it, and it is so accurate. Yeah, there's not much else to talk about. I
would say if you want to have a more in-depth understanding, or at least have it explained in a way that's more entertaining, watch the movie.
Right, and again, our ultimate goal here has always just been to kind of use these movies to, one, kind of see what they got right, what they got wrong, and then also use them as a launching point to talk about something relevant to world history. But this is an instance where the movie itself really does just say everything that we would need to say. And it does the job for us without... Most movies aren't so direct and to the point and accurate in a way. In the larger context is just kind of what we're talking about with, other global markets. And obviously the fallout of this did extend well into, the next few years. But I think they said unemployment rates, continued to fall. And now also, I guess worth talking about is how Obama was probably already leading in the polls in 2008, but this eventuality did kind of probably tip the scales in his favor, and not because it was, Bush's fault or anything like that. I think economic stuff is kind of just bigger than the president a lot of times.
And any bad economic situation
hurts who's in power.
It's not good for an incumbent, regardless of party or regardless of anything, really. Right. If the economy's bad, especially if the economy goes from good to bad, that's not it's not good for the incumbent or the incumbent's party in the case of the 2008 election.
Right. So in a world where Kerry had won in 2004, you would probably say that McCain then definitely wins in 2008, because it still would have happened. I mean, arguably,
everything else being equal. But
who knows? Whatever. Yeah, it's hard to predict, but I would say the odds become much, much higher of McCain beating Obama.
Right. Yeah. It's a failing economy, or recently failed economy, is a hard thing for a politician to overcome.
Right, and it would be easy for them to start pointing the finger at Kerry. Of course, I guess it would have been Obama running, it would have been Kerry running, and that gets all kinds of other complicated too, because it would have been Kerry running for re-election. So then you would say, McCain probably does beat him. I don't know. It's complicated and hard to predict, but
so I know that in other, especially your older episodes, you would do an elsewhere in the world at this time thing at the end, and this does kind of relate to the movie, because they show it on the TV in the scene where the two younger guys are in their garage, and one of them's flipping through channels, and he flips through two channels talking about performance enhancing drugs and doping, specifically Barry Bonds and Lance Armstrong. And I mean, I don't have a lot to talk about, but at this time, 2007, 2008 was when Barry Bonds was going through his steroids scandal, and Lance Armstrong was going through his doping scandal that eventually caused him to be stripped of all of his Tour de France titles.
Okay, that was kind of contemporary to this.
And I know you like to include sports stuff in here when you can too. So
no, that's a good call. And also this year at the Oscars was a particularly strong year, and we kind of talked about some of these movies in our best of on Best of the Decade on Track Nerds. But so Spotlight won Best Picture, but it was also the same year of Mad Max Fury Road and The Revenant. And I mean, even the other nominees, Brooklyn, Room, The Martian. I mean, pretty strong year for films. And I always wonder if The Big Short could have won in another year.
But since in the Facebook episode and the 9/11 episode, we talked a little bit about how this affected us because we were both alive and have memories of this time. Do you remember what you were doing in 2008? I mean, I was a sophomore in high school, so I was like running cross country and track for you, but that was pretty much it. I mean, I don't remember the economy crash really affecting me that much because, like, you know, in my mom wasn't working at the time. Well, she was like part-time substitute teacher when she could, and like my dad was a police officer, so you know his job was safe. He wasn't like working in a sector where a lot of people were losing their jobs. So my family and this time was relatively stable. But did you have any ill effects from this time?
Not me personally, as far as, you know, my own financial situation, but where I did see it was with school funding. And so when it comes to the amount of money we have to spend on track and cross country and other school programs, that tanked. Like, so before this happens, I remember things like, so actually like in the spring of '08, we ordered like new shorts for the track team and it was like no big deal. And then the year before that, I remember, you know, the athletic directors telling the head coach at the time, basically open up the catalog of track equipment and be like, point to what you want. We got $2,000 we need to spend. Like, it's the money was there. Then how just after buying those shorts in '08, I don't think we got a single stitch of new clothing for the track team for 3 years. And so we definitely saw that pinch big time with schools cutting way back. And I think they were eliminating positions and just, you know, talks of eliminating programs within the school, and some of the other local schools, I think, you know, eliminated their music programs. And so that was very big. And frankly, we're 12 years after that and we have not fully recovered. We're not spending like we were, even, and we get bond issues and stuff, but that's a separate amount of funds. You think about state funds coming to the schools, it has not recovered. We don't have the levels we had 12 years ago still.
When I first got my job after I got out of the Marine Corps, when I first started working for the city of Phoenix, it was less than a year after they started hiring again, and they stopped hiring in 2008 during the financial crisis. So that, you know,
they were on like a 5-year freeze. Yeah.
Oh no, it was 8 years.
8-year freeze. Wow.
8-year hiring freeze. Yeah, it definitely, even to today, and with coronavirus, we're kind of dealing with our own economic issues now, but yeah, this definitely had far-reaching implications into the future.
Okay, so as we're nearing the end of our world history project here, next week in our penultimate episode, we will be dealing with Iran in the film About Ellie.